Welcome back, everyone. This is Chase. And joining me today is one of our alumni, Veronica Villhard, alumni of the OPDD program, class of 2019, who's now a footwear designer for the innovation team at Under Armour. Thanks for joining me.
Absolutely. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, it's good to see you. Good to talk to you. It's just nice to talk to, former student, graduated, and now working in the industry. We've wanted to do this, just kind of like alumni check-ins with people. And then especially with like COVID and everything going on, we thought, this would be a good time to just check in and like see how you're doing and see what's going on. And, kind of what's happened since graduation, which a lot has happened. So thanks for jumping on.
It's like really only been a year.
Yeah. So 2019, what's happened since then? What have you been doing?
Well, since 2019, I graduated. I had a fantastic summer in Utah. Did a little road trip on my way to Portland when I accepted this job with Under Armour. And I've been working in Portland for Under Armour since the beginning of August, but for the past, I think it's been 5 months now or something. We've been locked down and quarantining. I worked from home for about 3 or 4 months, but then decided I could work from home anywhere. So I've come to St. Louis, Missouri to work from home, like with the family where I'm from.
Work from home.
Yes.
So the footwear team is based in Portland. So that's where you've been since August. And then the company kind of locked down, it was March, right? Like mid-March.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you were working from home and in Portland for a couple months, and then you're where you're at right now. So how's that been for you? Like overall, how's like COVID, that experience, like working from home, like everything getting locked down, what was that experience like for you?
Yeah. I think for like so many people and for you, it all happened kind of in the blink of an eye here in America. And it was kind of trickling in for us, especially, when you're when you work with product, you're working with Asia a lot. So our ability to make prototypes and get samples back started slowing down probably a month and a half before we even started entering quarantine, because our teammates in Taiwan or in China were quarantining before us, because that's where it all started and broke out. So then when it actually came to us, it was I think they were just starting to kind of reopen a little bit in China. So we switched roles. It's kind of reversed, and now we're at home and still at home.
Let's go back and talk about like pre-COVID. Things were normal. Like what was it like working at the company pre-COVID? Because you were able to do that for a few months before work from home and everything happened. What's that experience like for you? What was the day-to-day? How was that?
I like to think of it as like my first big girl job, I guess, where you're commuting to work, there's a salary, you're working 9 to 5 and all this stuff. And I moved to a brand new city as well. So, building friend groups and just getting comfortable in your new environment. But working at Under Armour in Portland, it's a much smaller office than the headquarters in Baltimore, Maryland. So, and you were there, you saw that we have about like 100 or so teammates, as we call them, at our office in Portland. And it was nice. I was biking to work for a little while, and until it started to rain a lot in Portland, then I kind of got off the bike and I started driving. And I had a desk with my other team members in innovation, and I would go to the concept center and our like lab, our concept creation lab, where we had sewing machines and laser cutters and 3D printers. So my process was much more hands-on, you know, like when I was in the office and in a physical space with, you know, all of my other coworkers in that same space too. If you had a question, you know, I just walk over to the materials, or walk around the corner to my manager, or, you know, go sew something up really quick. And that was a really good like learning environment. I like to learn in very hands-on ways and ask a lot of questions and just hop in on meetings and things like that. So I think then when it started to transition to like working from home, some of those objectives, like my learning objectives, which were much more hands-on focused, have changed to focusing on my digital skills and my emailing abilities and my ability to use Zoom and WebEx and any other number of virtual collaboration tools. You know, you have to learn how to communicate in a different way. And so it's definitely evolved just in the last few months.
What were some of the, I don't know, like going from graduation to going into that first full-time, like real job, like what was what was going through your head? Like, were there any big shocks or like wake up calls, or, you know, what was kind of running through your mind, like those first, you know, the first month on that job? It sounds like there was a lot of new things, right? And learning how to communicate in different ways with different people, maybe having more tools at your disposal, like being surrounded by mentors. I guess what were some of the big differences, you know, when you came into that first full-time role?
Yeah. And you know, like the difference is my point of reference is college and school and the community that I built for a number of years. And you know, like when you go to college, you kind of inserted into a community and a group of friends, and it works fairly seamlessly, you know, because you're all going to the same classes, same schedule, same age, you know, same perspective in a lot of ways, even if you're coming from a lot of different places. So then when I moved to Portland, which I've done this many times, and you know that I've jumped from Missouri to Kansas on my own, and then from Kansas to Utah on my own, Utah to California by myself again. And then, you know, I was like, oh, what's the big deal? It's another, you know, new town. I've done this 3 times before. I can do it again. It was different this time. You know, I think it was different because there wasn't that college bit in it anymore. You know, it's that first year out of college. And I had heard from a lot of my friends who had graduated the year before me. They're like, man, it's tricky. Like this first year is hard, and they were going through it, you could say. And I was like, I think I'm going to be fine. I can't wait to graduate. I'm going to handle it so well. I will be free. And instead, the freedom was very exciting, but also a little overwhelming, certainly. I think that's just a part of graduating and entering the real world, or the corporate kind of world, or starting your career, things like that.
The course is no longer set for you, right? Like there's this clear path of like, oh, you go through school, and then you know, elementary school, middle school, high school, you know, go to a college, 4 years. And then, I mean, it's just kind of the path is, you know, it's wide open after that. And then even when you're in a career, it's like you're in that career, but it's still kind of wide open, right? There's no clear path after that necessarily. But can you talk a little bit about like your position and working in innovation? You mentioned the transition of like going from in-office work to home was different because you're working on like much more hands-on projects and a lot more prototyping. And is that like unique to innovation and to that team? Can you talk about that team and kind of your position?
I think that it's unique to innovation sometimes in some ways, because we have time. We have more time sometimes. The
Time,
cadence.
yeah, time in that like the products that you're working on are like further out, right?
Exactly. So there's the innovation team, and then there's the inline team. And inline is working on like an 18-month cadence or so. And every 18 months, you have a new season, new product that you're designing the next thing that will come out in a predictable way in 18 months. So you start that design cycle and you go through development and then through execution and marketing and sales and all of that. So in innovation, it can vary, maybe it's 2 years out or a 5-year long project that your idea may or may not hit the market. But typically some aspect of it influences the inline designers projects. So in innovation, a lot of our team, like my teammates, are digital designers. They're incredibly skilled with 3D modeling techniques and developing their ideas through Rhino and Grasshopper and creating these like virtual models of their ideas. It's just like if I were to sketch, because I'm fairly more of a 2D designer, you could say, or especially using my knowledge of sewing, which I learned from outdoor product design. Thank you. That's my skill for communicating my ideas. A lot of my teammates on innovation use, their ability to 3D model their ideas and communicate them that way. So it's like me creating a sketch render of a shoe. They'll create like the render of a shoe that you can then rotate 360 and see the whole thing, which is pretty amazing. And I'm trying to learn as many tricks from them using Blender or Rhino, Gravity Sketch, stuff like that.
Which has probably been kind of fun for you to just experiment and learn new tools. And
Yeah.
I'm curious from your perspective, like, I feel like sometimes you feel, at least I think this way, it's like, oh, you graduate and then you get into a job and you're done learning, right? But it's like, if you don't continue to push yourself to learn new tools, you get left behind in a way. And it seems like a cool place to be able to work, at Under Armour, where you're surrounded by other people who can teach you and you can learn new tools. And how important is that to continue to push yourself to learn new things, even though you're not in a formal, education program anymore?
Yeah.
Like how important is it to have like the self-discipline to go and push yourself to learn new things and new tools?
Oh man, I think it's so important. And I think it's especially a part of the innovation process, or being a designer or creative thinker in innovation, in any innovation team. Because sometimes you're going to have these big ideas that the tool or the manufacturing device, it might not exist. The way of making it might not exist quite yet. So you have to sometimes learn other tools or find ways of making this idea that you have. Some examples even of that are a lot of the very organic forms that are coming out, and like 3D printing of soles, or creating these computer generated plates for cleats. Those things were developed through an architecture, an algorithm used for like architectural engineers, where it's like parametric modeling, or I'm not sure if parametric modeling is exactly associated with like the computer generated designs, but it can create a map of where you need the most strength and where you don't need as much material, where you need more, where you need less, and kind of populate your design, and then you get this really organic and beautiful a product or structure or something that was used for maybe a building, but now it's being applied to footwear. So you have to think outside of just what are the tools used in footwear or whatever, and branch out to these other areas. I think that's why in innovation we also have a lot of teammates who aren't from the footwear industry necessarily. They come in from outside sources. Like one of my coworkers, he was designing toys before this, and he was using a different kind of 3D modeling that they use for like toy design, and he has applied that knowledge to modeling shoes, and his skill set is so unique, and the outcome of his work is it's incredible. And it's because he has kind of this outside knowledge. He can come at the problem from using a different lens or coming at a different angle, so you can then come up with these ideas which are more disruptive or unique and interesting.
In our history series that we've been doing, we've talked about different founders in the outdoor industry, and those who like really drove like change and innovation, and like maybe had a different background. Like one in particular is Jack Stevenson, who started a company called Warm Light, and he was an aerospace engineer who started to bring like more aerodynamic designs to tents. Largely up to that point, it was A-frame tents, and he created one called the elliptical arch that was like, it was an aerodynamic tent, and no one had really seen that, but he was able to bring that because of his, different perspective. He didn't come, from the outdoor industry. He kind of came outside, which I think is kind of what you're speaking to. And I think at the core of it is just like trying to be a curious person. And from your perspective, like, how do you develop that as something that you already have? Because at some point, right, there's not always going to be someone there who's saying, oh, you need to learn this tool, or you need to learn this thing, or, so a lot of that has to be like self-motivated.
Mm-hmm.
How do you develop that curiosity to just look for insights or look for interesting things from all over, not just the one industry that you're working in, but in design in general?
I think I personally have been a very curious person, and I like research, and I especially like asking the question that so many people like to ask on our team: why? That's just a classic question you need to ask is why is it like this, or why do we use that material, or why is it 3 pieces rather than 1, or something like that, or why is it not more? So you have to kind of question everything. You have to be a questioner, a curious questioner, and I think I get to work in an environment where that culture is fostered, a culture of like curiosity in a lot of ways, where value discoveries and stories of research and what you've found through going through the process. That can take time, whether you're talking to a new athlete, or researching moths, or trying out a new tool and sharing what you've kind of discovered and learned from it. So we definitely, I think, still because of that extra a little bit of longer timelines that we have in innovation, we make time for the research and the questioning and the exploring, and that's really exciting to be a part of something like that, where the pressure is there, but there's just so many conversations, so much brainstorming, so much silliness, but also like direction too that you get out of that. It can be a very playful process, which I think leads to playful and like joy inspiring product, and I value that side of problem solving, designing, and things like that.
That, I think those are like good lessons, especially not only for people who are already in the industry, but current students. So any current students, take note. Take that time to do the research and ask the questions before you dive headlong into making something that you think needs to exist. Like,
Yeah, go on a crazy tangent,
Yeah.
what you can almost frame, you might think, oh, I'm procrastinating or this doesn't work, but maybe going on that weekend backpacking trip with like a school backpack instead of your great backpack, or with the Hyperlight if you're trying to design something lighter, or trying to just, I don't know, just go do something, go play, and see what you discover in that kind of, in those kind of environments.
Right. No, I think that's great. So COVID breaks out, the company has you start to work from home. What was that transition like for you? Going from that office life, that camaraderie, the unintentional, like, you run into someone at the office and the conversation happens and things happen from there, you lose out on some of that being at home.
Yeah.
What was that transition like, working on a team, but having to do that apart?
The transition was very abrupt, and I think still transitioning. I think I discovered something as well, even just now, like maybe this week, where it's all sinking in, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm kind of a designer working remote, like all of us are now, and started just to process more of this even 5 months later, but at the start, it was just, the only direction was, go into the office, schedule time, let our facility manager know that you're going, so we don't have too many people there. Grab whatever you need, so I grabbed my Cintiq, this 22 or 24 inch Cintiq Wacom giant tablet for drawing and using Illustrator and hooking my computer up to. I took that weeks later, probably 2 weeks later, because I was trying to do all of my work just from my laptop at home. And I was also sitting on my office chair at home, the one that I just had at home. It was just like a plastic white chair. And from all of the scrunching and all of like the using the touchpad, I feel like I developed carpal tunnel and a hump on my back. I was so uncomfortable. So I realized, okay, I need my tablet, and I had to grab my office chair as well. I miss my standing desk very much, but those were things I just had to do. And very quickly, my apartment turned into an office space and a workshop. There was 1 week where, I had my tablet going, I've got my office chair, I pulled out the sewing machine on the dining room table, I had a computer tower with my VR headset, Oculus Rift, in the living room, and I was just like, I commandeered the whole apartment and turned it into like the second Portland headquarters for Under Armour. It was ridiculous, but just what you have to do. So the transition has been trying out a lot of new tools to better collaborate. And I think we're starting to hone in on that a lot more. I'm much better at using Zoom and WebEx and setting it all up and communicating through email. And there's so much less awkwardness with it. I think before, for a lot of teammates, it was just like, I don't want to show my camera, or I can't do this, or it would lag, or there'd be so many technical difficulties. But now it's pretty seamless. And we've gotten into a really good way of working like this.
Yeah, I think everyone's trying to figure out that home office setup, and I think that's going to continue to evolve and change. Like, I mean, I'm producing more of like, these video series and podcasts. And so I'm like, oh, I'm learning a lot more about lighting and, like figuring out how to do some of that and producing. And I think everyone's kind of doing that to a degree. It's like, how do I produce my videos a little bit more? And oh, what's my ideal office setup with my Cintiq, or, getting the VR head, set up, and getting the right chair, like things that you just take it, for granted at work. Now we're all having to try to simulate that experience at home.
Totally.
What have you missed about like the in-office experience?
I think there's a few things. I I do miss having people, my coworkers, to talk to, coworkers who aren't just my roommates. You start to get a little stir crazy at home. But I definitely miss those conversations that we would have. There's so many really inspiring people who work at Under Armour at the Portland office, and whether you're going to grab a coffee or you meet them in the concept center and they're working on something and you get to talk about, the projects they're working on, or impromptu little sketching pro tips on how to use Procreate better, or those kind of things I definitely miss. I think I also miss and I've said it before, but just having the sewing machine there and the laser cutter and being able to make things. That's so much of how we learned how to design during school at outdoor product design. And it's so ingrained in my process that to not have that, and also not be even honing my skills even more, because I'm not from footwear. I was designing apparel and backpacks and hard goods, and I did take a footwear design class and can sketch shoes very well. But so this year I've really been having a part of this year is learning how shoes are built and made and manufactured, and not being there hands-on and watching videos or having Zoom meetings with developers to learn, or looking at materials through a screen. It's not quite the same learning that I was expecting to have this year, especially with travel not being a thing right now. There won't be any travel to Asia, to our manufacturing partners, or to our innovation office in Taiwan. I don't foresee that happening for another half year at least, or until there's a vaccine. So that's something, we wrote our goals down for the year, maybe, and submitted them maybe a week or two before everything changed. And just this month, we had to rewrite our goals, everybody in the organization, because they're just not relevant, really. Not all of them are so much anymore.
Yeah, some of those just go completely out the window because we're living in a whole new world, right?
Mm-hmm.
Playing by a whole new set of rules, right?
Oh yeah.
What are some of the workarounds that you've been able to find? We're in a like, especially in the world that you're in, where you're developing physical products, like to be doing that separate from people, you rely so much more on communication tools, just so many different tools to communicate the ideas that are in your head. And everyone we've talked to recently like has had that same issue, right? It's like, how do we look at a sample, like, where we can't all do that in the same room? Like, we all have to send that to each other separately, and we write down our feedback, and then we get together and talk about it. Like, what are some of the workarounds that you've found, especially in this world of making physical goods?
Yeah. I think that same one that you highlighted about having a sample, and you need maybe 5 different parties to see it and feel it, and maybe even try it on. It's kind of like either it's being mailed around to different people, or we go into the office at different times and alternate, and then it's cleaned and sanitized, and you do it again. So that's one that's not been like super ideal. But when I design like a 3D model of a shoe sole, we have a 3D print technician on campus in our building. It's not a campus, it's just a building. But and he will deliver it or mail it to anyone who needs it. And honestly, that has been a really great process. It's kind of nice to have a sample arrive at your front door and you can immediately see it and use it, and or maybe even try it on, go for a run if it's not a 3D print, if it's actually coming from Asia. And that's kind of cool, to get it at your front door sometimes. And so we found that process to be mostly okay. If it needs to go to multiple people, that's when it gets tricky. I think other workarounds, though, that have been kind of exciting, that I can foresee carrying into the future as we're trialing it out in this time. It's like, okay, how can you, in theory, have 5 people in the room and all seeing the same sample? And we've been working with Gravity Sketch, which is a VR, virtual reality sketching software that is compatible with VR headsets. And our team, we're using like Oculus headsets, whether it's the Rift or the Quest. And we started this a few weeks. We actually started it before this whole working from home thing. But when, we had to actually start working from home, we found a new use for the virtual reality sketching space. And that was this co-create kind of place that we can go to where all of us can enter the same virtual room and talk to each other, and you look like this floating goggles and floating hands, or with like a pen, and you can sketch on the same things. We can create a virtual concept room and board, and we can actually 3D model and work on the same 3D model at the same time. And like the first time that I hopped in there with my boss and my coworker, John, we spent an hour in there 3D modeling and learning this new sketching technique and talking to each other. And I felt like I had actually hung out with my teammates for the first time in a long time. And that was really cool. You just like feel like you socialized, and you become very aware of what it feels like to socialize and not socialize. And we all have in the past like 5 months, but that's been the coolest thing, is working with this virtual reality space as being maybe an option as it becomes more robust.
Well, it seems like VR for a long time, as long as it's really been around, seems like it's like a nice to have.
It's a nice to have, or it's kind of goofy. If you see someone wearing a headset, everybody was very they didn't want to be, they were insecure wearing the headset, like at work, at your desk, and you're just like in your zone there, But I think now it's like, no, this is worth getting over some of that insecurity, because it's actually a really powerful, strong tool.
Totally. I think we're starting to realize like the use case for VR, like, and some of the real applications, right? For its use. Like, I think, it's been a fun tool to experiment with, but it seems like there's some real practical applications, when we're forced to be apart, right? Like we start to discover, oh, okay, we could actually use it for this thing. And that's cool to hear from your perspective that it's like, it's not a perfect replacement for in-person, an in-person experience. Like, it'll take a lot for it to probably replace that experience, but to be able to feel like a closeness, or feel like you had a conversation, and feel like you were hanging out with someone or working in, close together, like that's pretty significant. That's big.
The meetings that you have in a virtual reality room versus the meetings that you have over Zoom, it's very different.
Right. Oh, I bet. I mean, and that it's interesting because you can always screen share, right? And like show, oh, here I'm sketching something out, or here's me designing something, but it's just that other layer of like being fully immersed in, and you see the other people, even if it is just floating hands,
pointing
right?
at something, or they have a comment and they can show you exactly where it is, or sketch something up like Pictionary style.
That's really cool.
It's super fun.
Which we talked about this the other day. Is like, now you're going to become the master of Pictionary.
Yes.
right? And you
And
have to
that's kind
be.
of what designers do, you know, tech packs, when you send your ideas to, or you're trying to share your ideas with anybody, you're really you're playing glorified Pictionary, because maybe there's a language barrier, um, or just you have to communicate what you're thinking in a very compelling and clear way. So pictures, you know, speak louder or worth 1,000 words or something like that.
I feel like this whole experience is like hitting home more and more that like the job of a designer is to be able to clearly and effectively communicate these amazing ideas that you have. Like designers have really cool, innovative ideas and think differently. But if you
A lot of
don't
people
know,
have really cool ideas and think differently.
right,
Designers have that, as well as the ability to bring it into reality,
yeah,
to
right,
materialize it.
right. So being able to take those ideas, but communicate them through different tools.
Yeah.
Right. And so that I think that's been hit home to me even more recently. It's, you know, because of these barriers that have been created, like distance between each other, and having to learn new tools to be able to communicate ideas. Like I think that's what it comes down to, right? It's like that's the difference between someone who has great ideas and a designer who can like communicate those ideas to someone else
Yeah.
in a way that they can understand. Um, and like I just think it's so impactful and important that you continue to learn like different ways of communicating, right? It's not just sketching, it's not just 3D, it's not just prototyping, it's like learning how to communicate different things to different people in different ways. um so I don't know, I don't know if you've recognized some of that or seen more of that, especially recently, but it
Absolutely.
seems like that's been the case.
No, I think you're spot on.
How do you know, kind of changing, I don't know, my train of thought a little bit, but how have you been able to stay creative during this time? I mean, especially when, you know, you've been able to travel a little bit, or at least like go home,
Yeah.
you know, leave Portland. In some places, like you're able to go outside and do that safely. So there's outlets to go and explore and get a change of scenery. But in a lot of cases, we're all just home, and how do you stay inspired and, you know, stay creative when so much of what's around us is the same?
Right. I think for me, uh, creativity, being creative, as cliche as it might sound, it's part of me. It's just like something that I do almost naturally. I really love to express myself through making things. And when it becomes your job, and when it is your job as well to create and make things, you have to direct some of your creativity towards a very specific goal. And in this case, it's designing a shoe, but not as simple as designing a shoe. You know, you're designing an experience and you're telling a story through a product. That's a lot of what industrial or product design is, creating an emotion in a product, as well as like solving a problem and creating like better performance, higher performing product to enable like an athlete to do better. So that's been interesting, having to keep my creativity focused on footwear. I did find my creativity would go towards bread like everybody or for a while, and then I found myself um, learning watercolor a lot more. I went through my old craft box, which, you know, looks like I'm a hoarder of art supplies, and I just got, you know, I want to relabel my craft box that I've just been carrying around the country for like 10 years, my in case of quarantine box, because I've used things that I haven't touched in 5 years, just in the past like 5 months that I've been at home. I've learned these new artistic skills. Um, and a lot of my creativity is like showed up in, you know, in cooking and finding creative ways to be with my community, which I really value, like my friends and family and creative counterparts, my coworkers, all the C words. But every Wednesday I was starting to set up this watercolor Wednesday situation. And it started with just my friend local in Portland, and we'd hop on a Zoom and we would just hang out. We wouldn't have to talk a bunch. We could talk about anything and then just work on our whatever craft that we had going on. And then I invited another friend from Utah, so then we had 3 people in there. And then I invited my mom and some friends from California, and it started to grow into this thing where every week we had more people joining and more people sharing what they're working on, what they're staying busy with, what they're learning. And I found that to be like really rewarding to have consistently and be a part of, to be like working on this new skill, and also just creating a space for my friends to make something or learn a new skill with me, you know, use that creative side.
I think that's really powerful. And, you know, something that I think we've thought about as a program, right, is trying to instill in students in the program, like, or trying to attract students who are passionate about creativity and design, right? And that can take a lot of different forms. Like, obviously there's core skills that we want everyone to get in this program, you know, the sketching, the 3D, the digital design, the hands-on. But I feel like the students who have done exceptionally well, like, also have an outlet outside. You know, with, I mean, I'm just thinking about your ability to watercolor, right? And pursuing that kind of, it doesn't directly impact your work or product design, but it's a creative outlet that could influence it.
Totally.
I'm thinking about, you know, one of our current students, he's building a guitar right now, like, and going through that whole process and learning a ton about woodworking. And it's not an outdoor product. I mean, but I don't think that matters, right? Like, he's learning this very hands-on process, and like developing like this ability to handcraft something that is going to benefit him down the road too. And kind of another extreme example, we, you know, in another episode of this series we've been doing, I talked with Nicole Mclaughlin. She's been doing all the upcycling, right? And
Awesome.
has really gained a lot of steam recently. And she'll take thrifted stuff and upcycle them into really crazy
Wait a minute,
shoes.
you talked to Nicole?
Yeah. You'll watch that episode.
No big deal. Whatever. Yeah. It's amazing.
It was really fun. And so you'll have to watch that one.
Oh yeah.
But she was telling me, and she says this in the episode, that, you know, with quarantine, like, she's still designing, but she's been playing Animal Crossing, right? And like, in Animal Crossing, there's like, you can design your own clothes, and like, that's an outlet, right? Like, and so I think just like, you know, whatever it is, like, staying creative and finding new and different ways to be creative is all the more important, especially right now, right? And pursuing
Absolutely.
whatever that form of creativity is.
Yeah, and sometimes, you know, you do have to herd your creativity like cats into, you know, work from in the 9 to 5 schedule. But kind of the beauty of this working from home schedule is, you know, it can blur the boundaries a little bit of work and life. But you know, if you like your work and you're really passionate about it and it's part of your life, then if you have this creative inspiration at like 8 p.m., you're kind of at work at home. So you can do it, maybe take a little longer lunch the next day, or start a little later in the morning, or really work at your leisure when these things, when you want to a little bit.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I'm going to ask you a couple more, I guess, more of the standard questions.
Let's do it.
You know, how has your experience been at Under Armour so far? I mean, what has that been like, just in general? I know pandemic is a part of that experience, but what's it been like to work for such a big company, and you know, be surrounded by such you know, talented people?
Big company, big question. You know, it's really crazy to be like 3 months out of school and just be immediately inserted into this group of people who've been doing this. They're like behemoths in the industry, and they've been doing it for like 25 or 30 years. You know, you're working with these experts, and then I'm coming in as like, you know, an excited noob of sorts and like I don't know anything, but I have the curiosity and the passion and some talent. So that's a little intimidating at times because there's just Under Armour has attracted incredible talent. Um, and so in some ways you can choose, and we all feel it, you know, a little bit of intimidation, but then it's like, oh my gosh, I work around some of the greatest teachers, and there's so many lessons to learn and so many skills to develop and pick up, and little pro tips from, you know, maybe the senior designer who sits across from you. Like, you know, you do a little skill share on Adobe Illustrator, and just like that, you're doing things more efficiently and faster than before. You know, Christian Tresser, who is just, you know, one of those behemoths, shoe dogs in the industry, he sat just right behind me, and he was on the innovation team in my first few months at Under Armour, and I feel like I learned a lot from him, and seeing his process, and just getting to be in that environment with all of these talented people. Eventually it should sink in. I'll be like, wait, I'm one of those talented people too. That's cool. But there's just so much opportunity to, I'm just constantly in awe, really, you know, when I'm working there.
That's awesome. What
Yeah.
have been some of the most impactful lessons that you've learned, like, since working in the industry? And you've had internship experience before, like you've been in the industry, you know, with some pretty great companies, to say the least. But what have you learned now coming into this full-time experience?
Man. Well, I have learned a lot. I'm constantly learning. It's just, you know, beginning of this whole career. I've learned some patience, and I've also learned when to hustle and speed up. And I think there's something that I find to be really unique about the footwear industry in particular, at least the footwear like office at Under Armour, is the importance of storytelling, and not just like, this is the athlete, this is the race that's coming up, and these are the colors that we want to use, and this is, you know, how we did it. It's like, what inspired you, what was impactful about that athlete and the interview you had with them, or the relationship that you have with them, or, oh my gosh, anything. So obviously I'm still learning because this story is so good, but that's something that I've learned is really important about the art of designing a sneaker or a cleat or running shoe, is like, what's your inspiration, and how is it impactful internally to your fellow colleagues who are also creative and desire to be engaged with and inspired. But, you know, that's what people look for. Like, when you're wearing a shoe or a product from a brand, you're wearing a story that you believe in or that has impacted you. And that's what I see now, like when I see shoes or jackets or tents from the North Face or you know, an Allbirds shoe, you know, I'm seeing a story that they have shared. And then how do you capture that story through this new and different language of materials and foam, you know, like foams and design lines and textures? It's kind of mind-boggling. I feel like I'm learning a new language. And that language is shoelaces and eyelets and, you know, the toe down view and outsoles, because all of that captures, you know, a visual idea.
Well, with that in mind, kind of learning a new language. I mean, there's no way you can learn like everything in a 4-year program, and there's very like specific things that you can only learn at a company.
Yeah.
But what do you wish you would have learned before getting into the industry? I'm sure there's a lot of things, but what do you wish you would have known?
What do I wish I would have known? Well, I'm really grateful for knowing how to sew, how to play and iterate through prototyping in a hands-on way. Grateful to know like the different initial, like some 3D modeling a little bit at the beginning. Like I feel like a master of none sometimes with how many things I know a little bit about from outdoor product design, and then a number of things that I know so much about. Man, what do I wish I'd known more about though? You know, it's always, it's the stuff that you can't always be taught at times, and that can be a particular work ethic and things that you have to learn on the job. And I know that I was hired right out of college. This is almost like my extended, this is like grad school for me. I am learning. I have been hired to learn, to be curious, to be taught, and to listen to these people, my coworkers, and this company and this industry. So I'm going into it as very much so a student mindset, but learning my own creative work ethic and how to do that in a 9-to-5 schedule and at a desk, and with specific timelines and expectations and colorways, and collaborating with other people so your creativity is on another schedule, you know, putting it on a schedule. So now all of that is kind of different because I'm at home and I can learn again. So it's thrown off my little learning train, but it's also just constantly expanding. So I think a lot of it is like a work ethic and keeping up with the pace of the industry.
Yeah, I think some of that is like hard to teach in school, like how you learn or how you work. And
Yeah,
I think hearing stories like this will inspire other students to start to reflect on that. It's
I think so.
like you said, I don't know if there's a way to teach that, but I think students just need to hear, oh, that, you know, that former student, you know, had to go through this their own internal process, and
Totally.
trying
I
to
think
learn
there's,
who they are and how they think and how they design and what their process is. And I
yeah,
think the earlier you can do that, the better.
totally. And you know, there's one thing that actually I think was really helpful about my experience at outdoor product design and how it's prepared me for an innovation team in particular. Um, and you know, I was graduating class of 2019, and that was the first graduating class of this program. So, you know, I entered the program 3 years prior for his first semester, and we had an interim director. The previous director had left. We didn't have, you know, the appropriate staff for the junior and senior years, which didn't even exist yet. There was no upperclassmen. And so your peers were your upperclassmen, and well, there weren't any, you know, you just had classmates. And it felt like every week there was a new something that was happening with the program, whether we hired someone new or a class changed, or the, you know, the curriculum would evolve constantly. And there was so much ambiguity in this really exciting program that I was super happy to be a part of. But it was also like, you had to start getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, with being a little confused, or with not having the exact answer or a perfect path carved for you, because, you know, that doesn't necessarily exist always. And with innovation teams, at least mine, and I really think all of them, there's so much ambiguity. You're coming up with an idea that's a little fuzzy, and you've been given any amount of time really sometimes to pursue this kind of idea, and you're creating your own path in a lot of ways, and it's constantly evolving. It's a moving target, just like outdoor product design was. And I think being a part of a program like that, where where I can pivot, and you have to learn how to do that, or how to just like hold on tight and stay committed to this thing that you believe in, even though you don't totally see the light at the end of the tunnel. You know it's there, or that's not the point. You know, you're just going through this journey, this tunnel, and learning along the way. Maybe you find a glowing worm while you're in there or something, and you are inspired. Who knows? But that being part of an innovation team where it is also quite ambiguous, it's like, I know how to do this. I'm uncomfortable. That's where I like to be, you know?
Yeah. I love that. And I think, you know, yeah, definitely the early days of this program, it was the first of its kind, right? And definitely laying the tracks like right in front of the train. That's kind of how it was in a way. And yeah, you guys are definitely the guinea pigs in a way. And I think to our credit, right? Like we were bringing in industry feedback, and I think one of the really positive parts of the program is just that constant connection with industry, that because industry was telling us to change something, it would continue to evolve, right? And that's life in general. That's like where you're at right now. It's like life is constantly changing, like your work is always changing. And I think you summed it up perfectly, right? Just becoming comfortable with ambiguity, with being a little uncomfortable without having all the answers. Like that's really important. Because really you graduate and there isn't that path anymore. You get to forge your own path and create your own destiny. I mean, that's cliche, but yeah, you get to
ride that wave.
Yeah, totally. Which is really daunting for a lot of people. And so I think, and you did this early on in the program, right? Was trying to create your path, or at least trying to map it out. Like you can't know for sure, like where everything is going to go and how things are going to work out, but you were like constantly trying to create that path. Yeah. So I think that's really important. And there's ways you can kind of strategize and try to create your own pathway, even if it's not laid out in front of you. But couple more questions for you. But
sure.
What are some of your goals as a designer? I know you had some goals within the company and those got thrown out and you're coming up with new goals, but do you have any goals outside of the company for yourself as a designer, or are those the same goals that you have at Under Armour? What, I guess just in general, what are some of your goals as a designer?
There are some like really concrete goals in this first, chapter of my outside of college design career. And those are just getting really proficient with all of the digital tools that we use and efficient, like fast, because that's important, especially Illustrator and Photoshop, because those are kind of classics and you have to know how to use them. So those are just that's just like one really basic, clear thing that I'm trying to do is be better and just really fast with those tools. And that comes just with working every day in those softwares. And then I guess other goals as a designer, I want to make product that is really relevant to the world that I want to be a part of and that I want to create. And as a designer, I mean, I'm a creator, I'm a maker, and so much of the product that we have in our world, it is either inspired by culture or it inspires culture. It's like the chicken before the egg kind of question. And I as like an innovator also, which I mean, okay, I would love to call myself an innovator. That'd be great. And I'm just going to do it now. And hopefully that makes me one. But, actions before words.
You got to talk it into existence for sure.
I'm talking it into existence. Exactly. As an innovator, I have some ability, or I have an interest in the future. And of course I want to be designing a future that I'm excited about and that I want to see. And that future is more diverse. It is more environmentally friendly, sustainable. It's less product, but better product, if not really good product. It's all of these things that are aspirational, and I think we have the ability to create that. So, you know, a lot of times I want to align this very ambiguous statement that I'm making, this vague statement, but you know, I just really care about using the creative, my creativity and the position and the role that I have at Under Armour, and going into my career to build things that support building a better future, I guess. It's the excitement of innovation. You know, I'm in a 2030 state of mind always. For me, it's not 2020. Which can be scary, but
yeah, I think most of us don't want it to be 2020, or we're thinking, oh, I wish it was 2030. That would be nice.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
And yeah, it would be nice. Maybe.
But what, that was kind of my last question, but any other like parting thoughts, just in general?
One thought that came to me earlier that I just wanted to get in there was, if you know how it works, if you know how to make it, you're not pushing hard enough or far enough. If it's innovative in a way, and that can show up in a number of different categories of innovation, but you know, if you don't know how to do this, then that's really exciting. Or how to make your idea, that's really exciting. That's when you start to like move the needle, as my boss loves to say. Like, are we moving the needle? I think this one does. Yeah, I don't know. That was just one thing I was thinking about, but.
No, I think that's great. And I think it dovetails really nicely with, I mean, just the values that you espouse, like that you mentioned at the end. Yeah, it's like, if you want to make stuff that matters, like you got to do stuff that probably hasn't been done before. Right. And so don't be scared off by the ambiguity, by not finding the answer just by doing a quick Google search. Right. It's like sometimes you have to create that answer and create that path, or create a new process, or, you know, you've got to find that answer for yourself, it sounds like.
And I also am not even a year into this, you know, like this is so new. I am so new at this, and my baby ideas haven't even been able to like grow out of the I don't know question yet. So I think it's really important for me to remind myself always, like, wow, I have just begun. I still have so much to learn, and just because I don't have the finished and final answer yet doesn't mean like I'm never going to have it. I'm really glad to have come home and gotten some perspective just from talking and processing some of this with my family, and realizing, wait, I haven't even had this job for a year. You know, I'm still just a sponge really right now. Try to make some impact, but
maybe one more question then for you. How do you balance that humility, right? Like recognizing the position that you're in, that you're really just at the beginning, but also not selling yourself short. Because I think so many people do that.
Absolutely.
And some people come in like way too overconfident, right?
Totally.
And think too much of themselves and their ability, when they really should be, you know, have more humility. So, but also a lot of people sell themselves too short. So how do you balance that humility and maybe that hunger, right? Or like recognizing, you know, what you have to offer?
Oh man, more conversations with my mom. No. You know, I think I'm still learning how to do that, because there is a lot of humility that comes with it, and for me, like, you have to be, I'm pretty comfortable with saying I don't know, but sometimes I do know, and I'll still say I don't know. And that's something, you know, that's a muscle that I'm still developing, the resilience and the self-confidence in my gut and my intuition and what I believe in, and my ideas, and even just the ideas that I'm trying to foster. I don't even have to claim them as my own. That's a whole nother conversation, but just strengthening your own intuition as an innovator or something like that. So.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I think that's a great place to end.
Hmm.
If people want to get in touch with you, like, how's the best way to do that, to keep up with all things Veronica's career?
You know, I do have a LinkedIn as far as all things Veronica's career. Instagram, you know, I'm on the constant delete, re-download, but you could find me there. I'd be glad if you want to share the handle. I think it's just like _Vill, Veronica Villhard. It just works.
We'll put it in the show notes as well as your LinkedIn profile, if you're all right with that. So
yeah, and happy to share my email with any incoming students or current students. I love the OPDD program and all things about it, and I'm really grateful for the people that I've met and networked or had conversations with through it. And I think absolutely it's my time to provide what was provided for me in whatever way that I can.
Well, we didn't want it to get past a year before trying to get you back involved. I mean, you can't go too far before we try to rope you back into this. So,
Yeah.
you know, if we let you go too far away, we might lose our first graduating class. So
You'd never lose me. I'll be here always.
That's good. Well, you know, you've always been one of our, you know, this whole first graduating classes, they've been great ambassadors for the program. So,
absolutely.
And thanks for all you do, and for representing us so well, and then taking time now. I know this is the work day, so we'll let you get back, you know, to your creative work, but thanks for taking time.